public notice and no public comment, two rules established during the Bush administration that ensure the listing of the polar bear as threatened under the Endangered Species Act is not transformed into a vast new expansion of government power to impose greenhouse gas emission regulations on economic activity across America. Section 429 empowers the Interior Department or a federal judge to limit potentially any carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas emission in all 50 states, using the polar bear in the Endangered Species Act as a regulatory vehicle. We all want to protect the polar bear. As the Washington Post editorialized last year, and I quote, "Though the polar bear deserves protection, the Endangered Species Act is not the means, and the Fish and Wildlife Service is not the agency to arrest global warming," end quote. By wiping out this rule under 429, any increase in carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emission would be subject to a potential lawsuits on the grounds that the action must first require consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service to mitigate emissions. What emits greenhouse gases? I'll name a few examples, Mr. Speaker. It's building a new factory in Pennsylvania or a new school on an Indian reservation. It's farming and cattle ranching. Most all of the shovel-ready projects on the trillion-dollar stimulus bill would in fact be at risk. Democrats know Section 429 is extremely controversial, so they slipped it into this massive spending bill behind closed doors. Mr. Speaker, why the secrecy? The reason is obvious. Section 429 threatens the creation of new jobs in every state and can do real harm to our already troubled economy. This is a backdoor maneuver to warp the original purpose and intent of the Endangered Species Act, to invent vast new climate change powers for the federal government to control economic activity. Democrats claim Section 429 is just an attempt to stop midnight rules completed at the end of the Bush administration. Yet, Mr. Speaker, these rules in the Bush administration were written in full compliance with the law. Democrats have written Section 429 to say, forget all the laws. Forget public comment from the American people. We don't have to follow the laws. Just wipe these legal rules off the books and put jobs and our economy at risk. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to make note that last night, the junior Democrat senator from Alaska wrote to the Senate Democrat leadership expressing his deep concern and objections to this provision, the harm it could do to economic activity, and that it should be removed from this legislation. That's exactly what we should be doing here today, and I ask my colleagues to support that action. I also ask, Mr. Speaker, unanimous consent that a copy of the Alaska Senator's letter be inserted in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
So again, Mr. Speaker, I strongly oppose this measure, and I urge my colleagues to open up the omnibus appropriation bill to amendment. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts, what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just, before I yield to Mr. Obey to respond to the last speaker, I'd like to just express my surprise that he would oppose a bill in which he has 30 earmarks in it. At this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Obey.
Minute.
Mr. Speaker, I simply want to correct one misunderstanding on the endangered species proposal. All this language does is to give the secretary, the new secretary, 60 days to re-examine the rule that was a midnight change in the rules.
Would the gentleman yield on that point?
I'd like to finish my statement first, if I could. All this does is to give the secretary 60 days to reconsider the rule and decide whether to go forward or not. This is a rule that was promulgated by the administration as they were going out the door after the election. And I have no idea what I think is the right public policy. I do not have any objection, however, to the new secretary taking a look at it before he commits the country to a change in direction. Now, I'd be happy to yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. 2 points. The reason this ruling came about was because of the listing of the polar bear, and the Bush administration started this process, which is required by law.
I only have 1 minute.
The gentleman from Wisconsin has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield the gentleman from Wisconsin an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 30 seconds.
I only have 30 seconds. My point is, I understand they began the rule a long time ago, but they did not promulgate it until after the election. And all this does not reverse the rule. It simply gives the new administration the latitude to determine whether they should go ahead or not. It leaves the situation in neutral, and I think that's the fair thing to do. Sure.
Listen, the gentleman, there's probably some disagreement on the rule, but why not go through the regular process to change the rule? You're doing it without any public comment.
I think the regular process would have been for the administration not to promulgate a new rule after the election when they were no longer accountable.
They started it last August.
Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Texas, what purpose do you rise?